On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and directors. This week's On Story, legendary television creator Carl Reiner.
I always loved writing, and writing is it. You're alone with a pencil or a typewriter and an empty piece of page, and something starts bubbling up. It's exciting. It's like walking into the woods and finding your way. You get lost in the woods and you find your way out, and you find a treasure at the end.
In this episode, Carl Reiner discusses working with comedy giants Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore on the influential sitcom The Dick Van Dyke Show.
Obviously, Carl was a great actor and comedic actor as well, and he wrote The Thrill of It All and The Dick Van Dyke Show, and he wrote on your show of shows, which we're going to talk about. He co-wrote Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, which he also directed. He also directed Where's Papa, Dick Van Dyke Show, Oh God, classic comedy The Jerk, All of Me, Man with Two Brains. And what's remarkable and what we're going to talk about today is he wrote on 158 episodes of a 6-year, long-running, massive hit show, The Dick Van Dyke Show, which you created. I wanted to take a little excerpt before we start, and this is from Dick Van Dyke from his book. When he wrote about Carl, he said, "Carl is the finest all-round writer to ever create a situation comedy. He's also one of the finest human beings to do so. But that represents only a fraction of his admiration for you."
He said it just the way I wrote it for him.
Exactly. What Dick said is that this was the greatest thing that could have ever happened to him. Being a Broadway actor and wanting to do something so long ago that he, really was very fortunate that he met you and that this project came to him. I want to talk a little bit before we get to the origins of the show. Where you wrote before, what did you enjoy, what did you find were your formative years of writing on your show of shows and Sid Caesar?
Well, on the show of shows, I wasn't a writer, I was an actor, but I was a writer without portfolio. In other words, I was allowed into the writer's room after the first few weeks there. I was always writing my own material in the Army, so I felt badly that I wasn't going to contribute.
On that show, there were so many great writers. Mel Brooks was a writer.
I consider that my college, by the way. In the ensuing years, there was, at the very beginning, there was Lucille Callan and Mel Tolkien, two Canadians,
right,
who were the head, he was the head writer. But there was also, on the way, there was Joe Stein, who wrote Fiddler on the Roof and also adapted My Enter Laughing into a play. And Neil and Doc Simon, I consider him a genius. He did 37, 38 full-length plays, comedies, movies. I always say that to consider a genius, not only the volume of the quality of the work, but the volume. And everything he did was a hit.
Remarkable.
So I would consider him a genius. And then Mel Brooks, Larry Gelbart, the wittiest human being that ever lived, Mike Stewart, who used to be our typist. He wrote Bye Bye Birdie and Candide. So I was listened and learned.
And then after your show of shows, then Sid Caesar had his own show.
Yes, he had a thing called Caesar's Hour.
Right, and then you were always a staff writer on that show, correct?
I was.
You acted and you were staff writer.
But I never had a credit because writing credit belonged to the original writers.
Right.
And Sid never took a credit on the show.
Right.
And he had a lot.
That was it. So it felt like a good time for you to sort of like drill down and focus on the situation.
I was being offered situation comedies, and my agent, Harry Kalsheim, kept sending me, and they weren't very good. And my wife, in her infinite wisdom, said, "Why don't you write one?" I wrote a show called Head of the Family,
Right.
which I, on Fire Island, I wrote a pilot. We sent it to my agent. He sent it to Peter Lawford, who was an actor and wanted to be a producer.
Right.
And he put up the money for a pilot. And so on Fire Island, I said, if I'm going to have a pilot and do it myself, I bet have a Bible for other actors
Yes.
who come along, other writers, I mean. So I wrote 13 episodes while I was on Fire Island. I did the pilot with a girl named Barbara Britton, a lovely actress, Morty Gunty and Sylvia Miles playing the other two major parts, and it wasn't very good. It was just all right.
Right.
And I just said, well, that's it. And I started writing films. I started writing a Doris Day film, and Larry
That's right.
Gilbert and I started working on that, The Thrill of It All. And I got a call from my agent that says, who was bothered that these scripts were lying on his desk, and nobody, gold, he called it.
Right.
And so he brought Sheldon Leonard in, who worked with Danny Thomas. And he said, I love these scripts. And this is something I've told many times. And I said, Sheldon, I don't want to fail with the same material twice. And here's a good impression of Sheldon. He says, you won't fail, Carl. We'll get a better actor to play you. And he suggested Dick Van Dyke.
The Dick Van Dyke Show. Starring Dick Van Dyke. Rosemary, Maury Amsterdam, Larry Matthews, and Mary Tyler Moore.
I was going to write a show about what I knew about was a happy marriage.
Right.
I ultimately married for 65 years. And I Love Lucy was two against each other, and my show was going to be two against the world. So I didn't dig those shows. I did say that Lucy, and she was maybe the most beautiful, best comedian we met, until Carol came along, and they did shows together too.
Yeah, that was brilliant to watch
Yeah.
them work together.
Yeah.
So define for us a little bit about the situation comedy the way you see it. Like, how is it grounded? How is it, what works? And obviously you wrote what was real for you, your family, your situation. Rob Petrie was a head writer of a television show.
Yes, but we dealt with mainly the problems that come up in marriages and the solutions to them. And as everybody else in the world, they have a home life and a working life. And as a matter of fact, when I wrote it, I said, what do I know about it? I was talking to myself. I said, what am I going to write about? I live in New Rochelle. I'm a comedy actor, writer, and so I'll write about that. So I wrote about my life. And I said, everybody's life is similar insofar as the relationship you make with friends, neighbors, your family. So I'll write about that, and that's what I wrote about.
Right, and you know, it's unusual in a way, you know, Lucy, on occasion you went to see where Ricky worked, but for the most part, the situation comedies took place in a home.
Yes, and it started when, honey, I'm home. I remember one thing when I first wrote it, I remember one of the executives at CBS or somebody, he said, this is very good, but nobody knows about comedy writers. And he said, that's something they don't know about. I said, why can't you make them insurance salesmen? I said, wait a second. I said, when you come home and start talking about what you did at work, who wants to hear about fiduciaries? I says, but when you talk about, if the product is jokes and you're making up a good joke and you say, no, that's not good enough, and people are laughing at what you're working at, he was convinced.
Doctor, what is the main danger in a trip of this sort?
What is the main danger in a trip of this sort? The main danger would be losing your life. That's pretty good main danger. What's the matter, Norm?
You want that last part in?
Now, wait a minute. Maybe she's right. Maybe we get something better. What is the main danger? Running into a thrill-crazed gopher.
I mean, that's marvelous.
Well, I don't, that's not so marvelous. Look, maybe we can come up with a better line than that. Come on, hit me again.
Well, maybe, what is your main purpose in going to the Earth's center?
All right, what is the main purpose in going to the Earth's center?
To find out whether it's chewy or chocolate cream.
That was the best part of it.
Right.
That the work he was doing was something that was getting laughs.
Tell us a little bit about that discovery. So Sheldon Leonard says to you, Dick Van Dyke, you know of Dick Van Dyke, but he told you, why don't you go see him and Chita Rivera, right?
He had been offered so many shows and so many things. He thought it'd be another one of those waste of time. And he was, when he read the scripts, he changed his whole mind. And he lent to it his own body and creativity that is it's unshakable. He's got more talent in his little finger than I have in my little finger. He's the most what is the word, versatile performer ever.
Right, and you see that in all the episodes, especially specific episodes like when you asked him to, when he was allergic to his family.
Oh, yes.
All right, now, Laura, once and for all, I love you. I love being married. I love Rich. There is nothing psychological in my sneezing, and I have no hidden hostilities toward you.
Then why did you dream I wouldn't give you a handkerchief? Down deep, you must think I don't care about you. And dreaming about your mother and father, boy, if that's not psychological. Where are you going?
I'm going to go to the den and get some sleep.
No, you're not. You're going there to sneeze thoughts that I can't hear.
I am going to go to the den to get some sleep so that you don't have to stay up all night saying, hey!
Gesundheit.
Yeah. See you later.
He did it so hilarious. As a matter of fact, I challenged him once. This was off camera. Everything you asked him to, he can do, and do it funnier than you'd ever expect. He gave us 25 different kinds of sneezes, and he stopped sneezing. He tried to hold back sneezes. Everyone was hilarious.
How did it become the Dick Van Dyke Show as a title? It's unusual because that's the name of the actor.
Yeah, we decided can't call the head of the family because it was done.
Right.
So they came up, Sheldon and a few people came up with
Titles.
dozens of other titles. And I said, fellas, let's call it the Dick Van Dyke Show. And I remember them saying, Danny Thomas's show was Make Room for Daddy, and he was a star. I said, yeah, but everybody knew who Danny Thomas was. He was a big star in nightclubs. I said, nobody knows. And they said, who's a Dick? They'd say, what's a Dick Van Dyke? I said, they'll find out in the first show. If you call it the Dick Van Dyke Show, they'll say, who's Dick Van Dyke? They'll see the show. Oh, that's a Dick Van Dyke, and he'll get to be known. I said, and it deserves to be called the Dick Van Dyke Show. He's got the talent that'll. You know, I likened to the fact that there were these game shows starring. A game show, a guy just asking questions. Starring so-and-so.
Right.
I said, he is starring.
You built the promotion into the title.
Oh, yes.
Now I get it. We'll talk about casting, then we'll talk about the writer's room. The casting of the show is remarkable. So after you find him, now you have to find your Laura Petrie.
Yes.
What was that process? You probably saw, I read that you saw,
I saw about 24 girls. And one day, a girl came into my office, and she was reluctant to come because she had gone on a few auditions and not done well. And she came in sort of, you could see that she didn't want to be there.
Right.
And I said, would you read a few lines with me? And I gave her a script, and she read the first word. It was just like, hello, Rob, whatever it was. And I heard a ping in her voice. I've said that before. There was something in her voice. And I got up from I described this, and it's exactly what happened. I got up from my chair, made my hand to the claw that you use in the arcades, picking candy out of a thing. And I went over and I grabbed the top of her head, and I said, come with me, young lady. And she thought I was going to accost her or something. And I walked her down the
by her head.
By her head. I walked her down to Sheldon Leonard's office, and he was at his desk, and I let go, and I said, here she is. And that was it.
Oh, that's fantastic. And did you hear that voice in your head of him saying, you'll know her when you see her?
Of course.
Oh, it's incredible.
That's why I brought him in.
By the way, did she have that classic hairdo that day she read? Or was that something you guys created?
She looked like she looked, yeah.
Really? That's how she wore her hair?
Yeah. They did a very great documentary on Mary Tyler Moore that was on last week. what a force of nature she was.
Oh my God! You're making me think that there's a classic episode where she gets a faucet stuck on her toe.
Oh.
And she's in the tub, and you had her wear a coat, right?
No, that was the only time we had a bit of an argument. She goes to, they have a romantic weekend in New York. Dick is in the living room putting on a fake mustache, and she says, I'll take a bath. And while she's in the bathtub, she says, oh my goodness, what happened?
Honey, the housekeeper's gonna send a maid up here with a key. How do you feel?
Wet and stupid.
Hey, honey, what is your foot stuck in?
The faucet.
The faucet?
You know, the little pipe that the water comes out of.
Well, that's not the faucet, honey.
Rob, I don't care what you call it. My big toe is stuck in it.
Well, how did you do it?
I was playing with a drip.
What?
But the thing is, we never saw Mary. It was her voice coming.
Right.
And she complained to me. She said, I'm doing a radio show and everybody's doing a television show. I've never seen. And I said, Mary, and she was upset. And I said, Mary, wait, listen to me. I said, I am giving the men in the country leave and the possibility of imagining you nude in a bathtub.
Right.
And she's, oh, okay.
Rosemarie.
Yes.
Remarkable comedic talent. Remarkable woman. Remarkable singer, comedic talent.
Rosemarie, my agent said, there's only one person who can play this character. And she's in my office right now. It was Rosemarie. And it was Rosemarie who, when she read it, she said, and who should play Buddy? My buddy.
Laurie Amsterdam.
Oh,
right.
she knew him for years. And I was thinking of a youngish guy like Mel Brooks, a younger. And I said, wait a minute. Laurie Amsterdam, my God, he's a human joke machine. That's what they call him. He had a club in New York.
Right.
And I saw him, and I said, my God, he's going to be gold for us anytime we need a joke. And he gave us millions of them from the 5 years that we were together. And so that was very fortuitous.
Gee, I ordered a fella. Maybe? Maybe I should have been a little more specific.
What do you expect? It's the end of the season. You're lucky to get anything. I asked Santa to send me something with a shape like this. Look what I got.
Those first scripts were just yours.
Well, yeah, the first 13 were mine, and then when I started getting help, I rewrote. I was my own story editor, so I was alone for a long time. And as a matter of fact, I wasn't getting money as a story editor until somebody said, story editor is a special job. Even if you're story editing your own stuff,
right,
it's a job. Because you do the rewrites. After you see it rehearsed, you rewrite it.
And you would do read-throughs of every script with the cast.
Yes.
And was Maury pitching jokes during that?
Oh
time?
yeah, Maury always got some good jokes, and we get not only for him, for
others.
But when the second year, I was starting to go crazy. I thought I'd go nuts.
Of course.
And
who can do that?
My nephew agent, George Shapiro, came in with two guys, Persky and Denow, Bill Persky, and he gave me a script they had written, and it wasn't good, and they obviously didn't see the show well, and I told him I didn't want it, and he told them to watch the show, and they wrote another script, and I didn't want to look at it because I didn't want to reject them again.
Right.
He said, read it, and it was That's My Boy. It turned out to be one of the funniest shows we've ever done, and also we were able to use African-American actors.
Oh, that was a classic.
We always looked for that.
That was the episode where they think that they've taken the wrong baby home.
Taken the wrong baby from the hospital.
You missed the expression on your face? Did I give you a good one, huh?
Oh, beautiful.
Boy, you're going to have to excuse me. I just haven't been myself lately. We just had a baby. Oh, you had? You did? That's right. We both had babies. Oh, you want to see the one that we almost pawned off on you? Yeah. It's ours.
Hey, That is a beautiful baby. You know, he looks exactly like you.
You really think so?
No, but why start him off again?
I almost did it off the page.
Oh,
It was wonderful. And when Persky and Denoff came over, my God, they started writing scripts for me, and then I made them co-story editors. We worked together, so I didn't have to be alone anymore. Persky and Denoff, very soon after that, Gary Marshall and Jerry Belson came on. If you have an ear for what's good and you hear something, it goes right in. Everybody was able to contribute something. You know, that wasn't on the page. And that was the selectivity of the producers. But that was a gift, you know, made my life possible.
Do you think that's one of the keys of being a great showrunner of a show? I mean, we're talking about the pantheon, the classic, the one that's referred to all the time.
Is to make the atmosphere so that they can easily contribute, so they want to contribute. It's making a landing strip for people who have things to put on. I did something that was accidental, but as a matter of fact, when Norman Lear started All in the Family, I said, I'm going to give you a present. And he said, what? I said, I'm going to give you my schedule. I said, we rehearse on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday we look at the show. They were going to shoot it on a Friday, rehearse all week and shoot it on a Friday. I said, no, rehearse it on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Friday have a dress rehearsal, a run-through.
Right.
Then I said, you go home with a script and you do work on the script Saturday and Sunday, fix the show up.
Oh, yeah.
And then on Monday, you bring in the new show, shoot it on Tuesday.
Brilliant.
And so you get 7 days of work on each show instead of 5.
That's brilliant.
And he took that and he did it for All in the Family. Of course, All in the Family became changed everything.
Yeah, it did. It changed everything. That kid Rob was pretty
good.
Yeah, I think he had.
Yeah.
He could watch his father's work. You know, Alan Brady,
yes,
the character you played. We didn't see him for the first 4 seasons, correct?
Yeah.
Having these writers and this staff beneath you and so on, and the ability, you know, for the show to get its legs, very much so, in all these classic episodes, did that free you to want to act in the show?
No, as a matter of fact, what Alan Brady came about as an offstage character. You always need a protagonist to make the
right, because Mel's always coming in, pressuring everyone.
Yeah. And about the 4th show that we needed Alan Brady to make an appearance, the show was a complicated, good show. It was, Mary tells about the fact I wear a toupee.
Right.
Have you ever been to Alan Brady's house?
Oh, yes.
Huh? Does he wear his toupee at home?
Oh, golly, yes, he wears it all the time.
You mean that Alan Brady is really bald?
No.
Well, then why would he wear a toupee?
Well,
That's it, ladies, the secret's out. She knows and she said it. How about that?
Can't do that with, I got to turn around for that.
Yeah.
So that's when I turned around. We learned that Alan Brady was me.
It's a great episode, too, because I think you had all the toupees laid out, and she's helping judge
It's
it.
one of our best shows, and that was Persky and Denoff again they came up with.
This is a cute one. I had this one made so people will say, Alan is losing his hair. Would you like that one? Or would you like a crew cut one that I had made for the summer? Oh, this one, Mike. Alan, you need a haircut. Huh? Would you like these? What do you suggest I do with all of these now, huh?
well, there must be some needy bald people.
Well, you always pitch to the strength of the actors, and when you find out they've got a talent that you didn't know they had, why, that's the best thing you can find out.
Right.
But this group had so much talent. I mean, when Rosemary, she could sing, she could dance. Maury, when he played the cello, his face changed. He played for real. Well, every once in a while we do that. Mary, who was a wonderful dancer, she was a wonderful ballet dancer.
Yes.
And when she and Dick did a soft shoe, you melted. Those are my favorite shows, by the way. I said for 2 reasons. One, seeing Mary and Dick do a soft shoe, I just melted. But it also made it much easier for me to write a show. Instead of 30 8 pages. I only had to write 20 pages. The rest was dancing.
Dancing and moving, yeah.
Yeah.
Now this note says, wrap up naturally. What is that? How should we do that exactly?
I'll sing an Irish song.
Okay, nice. That would be a good wrap up.
I'm a long way from home, and it's there that I'd roam, to lone Erin far over the sea. There's us. Is that enough?
That's great. And we'll cut, and you know what? We have to do this again.
You've been watching a conversation with Carl Reiner on Story. On Story is part of a growing number of programs in Austin Film Festival's On Story project, including the On Story PBS series, now streaming online, the On Story radio program and podcast in collaboration with Public Radio International, and the On Story book series available on Amazon. To find out more about On Story and Austin Film Festival, visit onstory.tv or austinfilmfestival.com.